The heat at Bitter Mesa Livestock Arena was thick enough to chew. Dust clung to boots and denim like a second skin, and the scent of sun-baked manure, leather, and motor oil hung in the air. Cowboys lined the weathered wooden bleachers, most with arms crossed and brows furrowed under wide brims. The auction had rolled on like it always did, until Lot 64 walked in. Then everything changed. 4 horses entered the ring, their heads completely covered by burlap sacks, each with 2 crude holes for the eyes. They were tied side by side, calm but unnatural. No brands. No names. No background. Just 4 anonymous animals standing in silence. Even old-timers from Whiskey Trace Cattle Auction and Dusthorn Stockyard stopped chewing their toothpicks. The auctioneer, Roy Daniels, cleared his throat. "Lot 64, he said, voice tighter than usual. 4 unbroken horses. No papers. No history. Opening at 100. The crowd stiffened. No one moved. Even buyers from Red Bluff Livestock Exchange and Black Hollow Auction Company kept their hands down. The horses were spooked-looking, and the sacks over their heads felt wrong. Like a secret someone had wrapped and left out in the sun too long. Most figured the lot would be passed over. And then, slowly, a single hand went up. Eli Morgan. Gray-bearded, silent, and worn like an old fence post. He hadn't bid on a single thing since the tragedy at his ranch outside Longhorn Creek Trading Post nearly 11 years ago. Folks said he'd buried more than just his wife that season. That day, no one expected him to show up, let alone buy anything. But there he stood, unmoving, hand raised to claim all 4 horses. Roy blinked. 100 from Mr. Morgan. He scanned the bleachers. Nothing. Do I hear too? The quiet was almost holy. Buyers from Cactus Ridge Sale Barn and Iron Spur Livestock Lot glanced at one another, then back at Eli. No one challenged him. Roy swallowed hard. Sold. To Eli Morgan. Eli walked into the pen without a word. He moved like a man approaching something sacred, or something dangerous. He reached for the first horse but didn't remove the sack. Just placed his hand on its neck and stood there. A stable boy, Colby Nash, barely 20 and fresh off a job at Broken Spur Auction House, asked, "Sir, you want help loadin' 'em?" Eli didn't answer. He turned and walked away, toward his trailer. The arena stayed silent, even after he was gone. No one asked questions. But everyone watched, wondering the same thing. Why those horses? Why now? And what was Eli Morgan really bringing back with him? The trailer creaked and rattled as Eli Morgan made the slow drive down the backroads leading to his ranch, just past Longhorn Creek Trading Post. The horses didn't make a sound. Not a kick, not a whinny, nothing. It was as if they knew they were headed somewhere familiar. Eli kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting on his thigh, fingers twitching now and then, like memories were trying to crawl back through his skin. The Morgan Ranch had once been the pride of Copper Trail Ranch Auctions, a place where breeders came for strong bloodlines and gentle hands. That was before Helen's death. Before the fences fell, and before the barn became a graveyard of old tools and older silence. As Eli pulled through the rusted front gate, the wind stirred dry leaves across the yard like forgotten thoughts. The dogs didn't bark. Nothing moved. Just Eli, the trailer, and whatever ghosts he'd brought home. He backed the rig up to the old paddock, the gate hanging crooked on one hinge. He stepped out and unlatched the trailer door slowly. Inside, the 4 horses stood just as still as they had at Bitter Mesa Livestock Arena. Their burlap masks still covered their faces, but Eli didn't take them off. Not yet. Instead, he led them out one by one, guiding them with a kind of reverence, like he was walking with secrets instead of livestock. By late afternoon, they were settled in the back pasture. Eli watched them from the porch, a chipped mug of black coffee in hand, his eyes distant. He hadn't spoken a word all day. Not since the auction. Not since he whispered something to that first horse. The sun dipped low behind the barn, casting long shadows, and still the horses remained quiet, unnaturally so. They didn't graze. They didn't move much. Just stood in a tight line near the fence, their sacks fluttering gently in the breeze. That night, Eli couldn't sleep. The wind groaned against the window panes like an old song he didn't want to remember. In the kitchen drawer, beneath faded receipts from Whiskey Trace cattle auction, he found the letter, the one postmarked from Black Hollow Auction Company, the one he thought he'd thrown away months ago. It had only 3 lines, typed on plain paper. They're alive. But not how you remember them. Lot 64. Bitter Mesa. He sat back in his chair, hand trembling as he stared at the letter again. Lot 64. He hadn't recognized them at the auction. Not fully. But something in the way the second horse turned its head when he touched it, it was like it knew him. And that's when he realized. One of them might be hers. Morning broke slow over the hills behind Longhorn Creek Trading Post, washing the Morgan Ranch in pale orange light. Eli was already in the pasture, thermos in one hand, lead rope in the other. The 4 horses stood exactly where they'd been the night before, close to the fence, unmoving. The sacks were still on their heads, but something in the posture of the second horse was different now. It turned slightly as he approached, ears flicking toward the sound of his boots crunching dry grass.
Eli hesitated. He hadn't seen that movement in years, not in the flesh, but in dreams, in memories. That little head tilt, cautious but curious, had once belonged to a chestnut mare named Junebug. She'd been Helen's pride, gentle with children, fierce on trail rides, and more loyal than any dog. When she vanished after the storm, right before Helen died, Eli assumed the worst. The fences were down. Coyotes were thick that summer. But now, staring at the second horse under the sack, his heart thudded in a way it hadn't in years. He unlooped the lead rope and stepped in slowly. The horse didn't back away. Instead, she leaned her head toward him, just enough to feel the warmth of his hand. His fingers shook as they touched the edge of the sack. He paused. Part of him was afraid that if he removed the covering, the illusion would vanish, that it wasn't her, that none of this meant anything. But the other part, the one that still heard Helen's laugh echo through the barn, told him to look. Eli pulled the sack back. Beneath it was a chestnut coat dulled by grime and neglect. But those eyes, they were unmistakable. Wide and brown, rimmed with the same white fleck Helen used to say looked like tiny wings. Junebug didn't flinch. She blinked, slow and deliberate, and rested her muzzle against Eli's chest. For a moment, the weight of the past cracked open like a thunderclap, and he nearly collapsed beneath it. He didn't know how it was possible. But Junebug was alive. Later that afternoon, he drove into Red Bluff Livestock Exchange looking for answers, carrying only the letter from Black Hollow Auction Company in his jacket pocket. The man at the counter didn't know much. Said the horses were dropped off by an anonymous hauler coming from the southern edge of Dusthorn Stockyard territory. No paperwork. No ID. Eli stepped outside into the sunlight, dazed. He stared out across the lot, past the rows of trailers and feed trucks. Somewhere between Dusthorn and Bitter Mesa, someone had hidden Junebug, and maybe the others, too. But why return them now? And why with masks over their faces? The drive to Copper Trail Ranch auctions took Eli through stretches of dry plains and rusting fence lines. The sun was high, bleaching the asphalt and warping the horizon like a mirage. He hadn't been to Copper Trail in over a decade. Not since the day Helen outbid a buyer from Cactus Ridge Sale Barn for Junebug's sire. Back then, people smiled when they saw Eli and Helen together. Now they just stared. He didn't blame them. Inside the auction office, a wall of yellowed photos lined the hallway. Champion bulls, prize mares, and smiling ranchers, frozen in time. Eli approached the front desk, where a thin, gray-haired woman with a name tag that read Martha Keller looked up from a ledger. Her expression shifted the moment she saw him. "Well, I'll be damned," she said softly. "Eli Morgan." "Martha," he replied, tipping his hat. I heard about Bitter Mesa. Folks say you bought 4 ghosts with feed sacks on their heads, she said, arching a brow. You here to explain? Or to ask questions? Eli reached into his coat and handed her the letter. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. The plain white paper with the cryptic message seemed to darken the room. She read it twice before looking back up at him. You think one of 'em is Junebug? I don't think, he said, voice gravel-thick. I know. Martha leaned back in her chair, letting out a long breath. There was a man here last spring, she said finally. Came through asking about bloodlines, old ones. Said he was tracing animals that went missing after the big fire near Iron Spur livestock lot 4 years ago. Looked like a hauler, but spoke like someone with a grudge. Never gave a name. Eli's jaw tightened. Did he say where he was headed? No, she said. But he asked about horses that came through from Whiskey Trace cattle auction. And he kept bringing up your name, like he was waiting for it to mean something. That night, back at the ranch, Eli sat in the barn beside Junebug. He'd removed all the sacks that morning. The other 3 horses weren't familiar, but they showed signs of training, his training. The small hand cues, the way they lined up without a word. He rubbed a cloth over Junebug's coat, brushing away years of dust and pain. The radio crackled on the shelf. An old gospel hymn hummed low through the static. Eli closed his eyes, letting the notes wrap around the silence. Whoever had them knew exactly what they were doing, and they weren't finished. The next morning, Eli walked the perimeter of the pasture just after dawn. The sky was still gray, and dew clung to the grass like memory clings to regret. The horses were calm now, moving slowly under the first light, but something gnawed at him. He hadn't checked their legs, their flanks, their hooves. If these horses had once been part of his ranch, there'd be marks, subtle ones only he and Helen would know. He led the 3rd horse, a tall bay with a white sock on the front right leg, into the barn. The others watched but didn't follow. With steady hands, he cleaned the dirt from its hindquarters. And then there it was, a faint scar in the shape of a crescent, just above the hip. Eli staggered back a step, breath caught in his chest. That horse wasn't just trained by him. It was Starboy, his old trail gelding. Presumed dead in the same storm that took Junebug. Starboy had been the fastest horse on the ranch, until the floodwaters came and wiped out the west pasture. Eli never found the body. Just an open gate and broken fencing near Dusthorn stockyards creaked. Now, over a decade later, Starboy stood before him. Alive, quiet, but not the same. Later that day, Eli drove out to Broken Spur Auction House. He didn't call ahead. He wanted to see who was there. The parking lot was mostly empty, but inside, he found Sheriff Grant Holloway, leaning against a post like he'd been waiting. Heard you were poking around Copper Trail, the sheriff said, tipping his hat without a smile. Eli narrowed his eyes. You know something? Maybe, Holloway said, and maybe it's better left buried, like your horses should have been. Eli stepped closer, voice low. Someone took them, trained them again, hid them behind masks, and now they're coming back one by one. The sheriff glanced around, then sighed. There was a rancher, Luther Briggs, operated near the edge of Cactus Ridge sale barn territory. Went broke after the fire near Iron Spur livestock lot. Lost everything: livestock, family, reputation. Rumor was he blamed you. Why me? He said your horses got out during the flood, tore through his fence line, started the panic, claimed it cost him more than just his land. That night, back at Morgan Ranch, Eli stood by the fence, wind cutting through his jacket. The horses were quiet again, but his mind was not. If Luther Briggs was alive, and bitter, then those sacks weren't to protect the horses. They were meant to hide what had been done to them. The next morning, Eli drove toward the edge of Cactus Ridge sale barn territory. The land got rougher the farther he went. Broken fences, blackened trees, and the skeletal remains of barns long abandoned. It was a graveyard of what used to be ranching country. He parked near a mailbox leaning sideways in the dirt. The name painted in chipped red letters sent a chill through him. L. Briggs. The front gate was unlocked, but the house at the end of the drive looked like it hadn't seen life in years. As Eli stepped out, a shotgun clicked behind the screen door. An older man emerged, beard unkempt, eyes sharp. He looked like time had been eating him from the inside. "Thought you'd never come," he said flatly. "Luther Briggs." Eli didn't flinch. "You took them." Luther leaned the shotgun against the porch rail. "Didn't steal them. I rescued them. After the storm, they were wandering near the wash, starving. Sheriff knew. He just didn't care. Nobody did." He stepped down onto the dirt, bitterness dripping from every word. "You left them to die, Eli, like you left the rest of us. I didn't know they were alive." "No, you just didn't look hard enough." Eli stared at the man, jaw clenched. "What did you do to them?" "I saved them," Luther hissed. "Trained them again. Broke them down to build them up. Taught them not to trust anyone. Not even you. They wore those sacks so they could forget what they were. What you made them into." Silence swelled between them. Dust blew across the road, and somewhere in the distance, a windmill creaked on rusted hinges. Eli took a slow breath. "Junebug remembered me." Luther's face faltered, just for a second. "Of course she did. Some scars never leave." Back at the ranch that night, Eli sat in the barn with all 4 horses. He had unwrapped them fully now, and they stood around him in a slow, almost reverent circle. He looked at each one. At the faded scars, the chipped hooves, the haunted eyes. They had been reshaped by grief just like he had. In the shadows, he found Helen's old saddle, untouched since the week before she died. He set it on a rack beside Junebug and ran his hand over the leather. Something in the stitching caught his eye, tiny, precise initials. HM, a reminder of the life he'd tried to forget. But now, forgetting was no longer an option, because Luther wasn't finished. And neither were the secrets riding with these horses. The next morning, Eli returned to the barn before the sun crested the ridge. Junebug stirred when she saw him, nudging at the stall gate like she used to do before feeding time. But Eli wasn't holding grain. He was holding Helen's saddle, the same one he'd uncovered the night before. Something about the stitching bothered him. He ran his fingers under the leather flap near the cantle and felt a soft ridge, like paper, hidden beneath the lining. With a pocket knife, he carefully opened the seam. A small envelope, brittle with age, slid into his palm. It was sealed in wax, the kind Helen used for her letters back when they first married. The initials on the front, L.B. Luther Briggs. Eli stared at it for a long time before opening it. The handwriting inside was unmistakably hers. "Luther, I can't keep your secret anymore. I'm sorry. What happened at Copper Trail, what we did, was a mistake. I have to tell Eli. The horses, the papers, everything. He deserves the truth." Eli sat down hard on the tack box, hands shaking. Copper Trail. That was where she'd bought Junebug's sire. What had they done? He read the letter again, trying to make sense of it. The papers, the horses. Then it clicked. Helen hadn't just bought horses at Copper Trail Ranch auctions. She'd covered for Luther, helped him move stock illegally, hidden identities, maybe even falsified bloodlines. And when she threatened to come clean, she was gone a week later. Eli stood and stormed outside, the letter clenched in his fist. He needed answers. Real ones. He saddled Junebug, mounted up for the first time in over a decade, and rode hard toward Black Hollow Auction Company, where the anonymous letter had first come from. The wind burned his eyes, and the gravel roads bit into the hooves, but he didn't stop. Not until he saw the old office. Inside, the clerk recognized him. "You got a letter, right?" the man asked, eyes shifting. "You're not the only one." "What do you mean?" "There were others. Same envelope, same wax. Sent to ranchers from Red Bluff Livestock Exchange and Whiskey Trace Cattle Auction, too. All tied to Briggs." Eli's pulse quickened. Someone had orchestrated all of it. Not just to hurt him, but to expose something much deeper. Helen's letter wasn't a confession. It was a warning. She had tried to stop what Luther had started, and paid for it. As he mounted up again, Eli looked toward the horizon. The land felt heavier now, like it was carrying more than just heat and dust. It was carrying betrayal, and someone wanted it all to come to the surface. By sundown, Eli was back on the trail, riding west toward the canyon stretch near Dusthorn Stockyard, where the flood had carved a scar through the landscape all those years ago. He hadn't ridden that trail since the night Helen died. But now, with Junebug beneath him and Helen's letter in his coat, he wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. He was chasing the truth. The trail narrowed as the canyon walls closed in. The wind kicked up ashes from a burn scar still visible after all these years. Charred posts, half-buried wire, blackened trees. This was the fire line. The same fire Luther Briggs had blamed on Eli's horses. But Eli knew better now. The blaze hadn't started because of stampeding animals. It had started because someone had wanted to erase records, bloodlines, and maybe people. As he reached a bend in the trail, a figure stepped out from behind a mesquite tree. Luther Briggs. This time unarmed. Just standing there as if waiting. "I figured you'd come here," Luther said. "I knew once you found the letter, you'd understand what really happened." Eli dismounted, voice low. "I understand you were lying to everyone, even her." Luther's face twitched. "She helped me. First. She thought she was protecting your name, your reputation. She didn't know how far I'd gone. By the time she found out, it was too late. She was going to turn me in. So I sent the horses away. Thought maybe if they disappeared, the story would disappear too." "You sent them away?" Eli's voice cracked. "Sold them off through Red Bluff Livestock Exchange, then through Iron Spur Livestock Lot under false names. Swap tags. Buried paperwork in old auction files. They ended up in 4 different barns. And when they started showing up again, marked, scarred, I panicked." Eli took a step forward, chest tight. "And Helen?" Luther looked down. "I didn't kill her, Eli, but I let her ride into that flood alone. I knew the gate was open. I didn't stop her. I figured if she never came back, the truth would die with her." The silence that followed was thunderous. Eli stared at the man he once called a neighbor and now saw as the coward who'd let everything burn. His ranch, his wife, his faith in people. Behind him, Junebug whinnied softly. In that sound, Eli heard something break loose, something old and buried. But it wasn't just Luther who had to answer for the past. It was Eli himself.
Eli rode back toward Longhorn Creek Trading Post under a blood-red sky. The wind had picked up, pulling dust and broken leaves across the trail, as if the land itself was trying to shed the past. His thoughts were louder than Junebug's hooves on the packed earth. Luther's words played on repeat. "She was going to turn me in, and I let her ride into the flood." There was no murder confession, but there was something worse, silence when action was needed. Back at the ranch, the other 3 horses were waiting near the paddock. Eli unsaddled Junebug and brushed her slowly, his hands moving on instinct. The scar behind her ear, the one Helen used to trace with her fingers, was still there. He couldn't stop staring at it. That night, he walked into the old tack room and pulled out Helen's trunk. Dust-covered and rusted at the hinges, it hadn't been opened since her funeral. Inside, he found journals. Dozens of them. Most were mundane, feed logs, breeding notes, rodeo schedules, but one stood out. Its pages were marked with Helen's smallest handwriting, reserved for secrets. In it, she detailed her suspicions about Luther's dealings, including false registration documents at Whiskey Trace cattle auction and falsified bloodlines pushed through Copper Trail ranch auctions. She'd been building a case. Quietly, methodically. Eli sat on the porch for hours reading. His guilt deepened with every page. Helen hadn't been naive. She had known. And she had tried to protect him, not from scandal, but from betrayal. The betrayal of a man he once trusted. She knew confronting Luther would cost something. She just didn't expect it would cost her life. The next morning, Eli drove into Black Hollow Auction Company with the journals in a box on the passenger seat. He walked straight into the office and placed them on the manager's desk. "These belong in the right hands," he said. "They'll tell you what happened. What's still happening." The manager looked through the contents, eyebrows rising with each page. "You know this'll cause a storm, right?" Eli nodded. "Let it." That afternoon, back at the ranch, he stood in the pasture as the sun dipped behind the barn. Junebug trotted up to him, the other horses following close behind. For the first time in years, the land felt alive again. Not whole, not yet, but breathing. And as he looked out over the fields Helen once loved, he knew what he had to do next. The truth was out. But the reckoning was just beginning. 2 weeks later, the silence at the Morgan ranch had changed. It wasn't the hollow quiet of grief anymore. It was something closer to peace. The horses roamed freely through the pasture near Longhorn Creek trading post, their movements fluid, confident. Junebug no longer flinched at Eli's touch. Starboy ran again. And the 2 others, still unnamed, had begun to trust him, little by little. The land was healing, and so was Eli. Word had spread fast. The documents from Helen's journals triggered an official investigation. Auditors showed up at Whiskey Trace Cattle Auction, Copper Trail Ranch Auctions, and even Red Bluff Livestock Exchange. False registrations, swapped lineage papers, illegal transfers, it was all real. Luther Briggs disappeared the day after the story hit the regional papers. Some said he fled south, past Dust Horn Stockyard. Others believed he never left the canyon at all. Eli didn't chase him. Instead, he rebuilt the fence along the back edge of the ranch, the same one that washed out during the flood. He cleared the weeds from Helen's garden. He repainted the faded sign above the barn door. It still read Morgan Ranch, but now, beneath it, he added a new name, Junebug Sanctuary. It wasn't about business anymore. It was about keeping safe what was almost lost, and honoring what Helen had tried so hard to protect. That Sunday, Martha Keller visited from Copper Trail. She brought warm bread and tears in her eyes. "She was always the strong one," she said, placing a hand on Eli's shoulder. "But you didn't break. That counts for something." Eli nodded. He didn't need many words now. He'd said everything that mattered in silence, in standing up when it was hard, in speaking truth when it burned. The weight of regret would never fully leave, but something else had taken its place, purpose. As evening fell, he sat on the porch with Junebug lying near his boots. Fireflies danced over the pasture. In the distance, a slow wind moved through the grass, whispering through the fence posts like a hymn. The barn light flickered on, automatic but somehow well-timed. A reminder that life goes on. He looked to the horizon one last time, where the sun had dipped below the rim of the land. What the world had taken, it almost buried. But the horses had remembered, and so had he.